Good afternoon. I am Megan Maloney, the Chief Academic Officer at American Reading Company, and I'm very excited for us to be launching our school year 2024-2025 Voices from the Field. As you may have known, we have held these webinars throughout the last few years, where we bring in our district partners and school partners to talk about topics that are on the front line, that are happening in their front lines, and bringing it to you for more context and for more support. So today we will be talking about formative assessment. And I'm so excited that we have 3 district leaders, as well as a member of American Reading Company, as well as being led by Dr. Scott. So let's introduce who is going to be on our panel today. Chris.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Arado. I am the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction in Villa Park School District 45. We are a district of 9 buildings in the western suburbs of Chicago. We have approximately 3,200 students. We're an ethnically diverse district with a large population of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, as well as we are blessed enough to have about 28% of our students are multilingual learners. And we adopted ARC in the year 21-22. So this is our 4th year. Actually, we adopted it a little earlier than that during the pandemic. But this is our 4th year using ARC.
Thank you. Dr. Fitzpatrick.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anthony Fitzpatrick. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for the Elk Township School District. It's a very small district in rural southern New Jersey. Our district has about 360 students, grades preschool through 6. We, again, a very rural district and ethnically diverse, probably about 33% students who are categorized as economically disadvantaged. This is our 3rd full year of implementing ARC.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Mazzoni.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. And I just love being a part with Anthony. So Anthony and I, we seem like we're always connected. So I love following him and being here with him and also being with Christine. But again, my name is Matt Mazzoni. I'm the new superintendent here in Millville School District in New Jersey. I was the assistant superintendent in Millville for the past 2 years. So we are starting year 3 of ARC. So on my first day as assistant superintendent was also the first day with ARC. So I learned right alongside the teachers, most of the teachers in the rollout. But a little bit about Millville. Millville is located in Cumberland County, southern New Jersey. If you know anything about it, it's number 1 in New Jersey for a lot of reasons, maybe not the best, high poverty rate. So we have a population of around 5,000 students, pre-K to 12, and our poverty rate for free reduced is around 80%. So, we have our challenges, but it's been wonderful implementing ARC and finding that love in our students. They're definitely enjoying the reading.
Thank you. Dr. Famularo.
Hi, I'm Lisa Famularo. I'm the Vice President of Research and Evaluation here at American Reading Company.
And I have the honor of being able to introduce Dr. Irvin Scott. Dr. Scott's currently on faculty at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. You can see the logo on his backdrop. He is actually teaching later tonight or today. But previously, Dr. Scott is a practitioner. He was a district leader, school leader, teacher, worked for nonprofits. He is a parent and he is a newly grandparent. I don't think I was able to add that last year, Irvin, Dr. Scott. So congratulations on that. And we are honored that Dr. Scott is a member of the American Reading Company Advisory Board And he is our facilitator of all of our Voices from the Field webinar. So super excited to have you with us today, Dr. Scott.
It's a joy to be here. Thank you so much, Megan. And can we just jump into things, or you want to set up a few more?
We are ready. Michael, you ready?
Michael's going to share just a couple of things. First of all, it's always an honor to be here. I like to say to people that I have done the work of teaching and leading in school districts and schools, but I'm not currently doing that work. And so the opportunity to spend some time with individuals who are actually doing the work that I'm teaching others to try to do in the future is always an honor for me. And this is a particularly important topic. I think this quote is very salient to sort of lead us into this topic. Once you learn to read, you will be free, forever free, by Frederick Douglass. And we know, hopefully we know his story of striving to read. And let's just face it, we have a lot of students who are in that position now where they're striving to read. We have a lot of educators who are leading that strive to read. And while there are some successes out there, there are a lot of challenges. We all know the challenges that came along with the pandemic. But actually, I think we should be talking about that less and talking more about what do we do now to accelerate the learning of students, particularly in literacy. So Megan, it is a
Yes.
powerful statement for American Reading Company to say, let's focus on formative assessment as our first sort of foray into the webinar. What perspective would you give from American Reading Company around why we should be having this conversation now?
Thank you. And, as a country, we continue to have large numbers of children and adults who are struggling with reading, despite our most salient efforts. While we know there are bright spots, we know there are districts all across the country that are beating the odds. If you've read the 74 article about Beat the Odds, we still have not fully rebounded from the pandemic and the era of lost. So as we know, we spend lots of time and energy assessing students and looking at data, but we have to ask ourselves, are we getting the most out of our assessment, and are we using them in the right way? We are so excited to have school leaders today whose districts are using our formative assessment, the IRLA, strategically to change results for kids.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I think we're going to just, from here, we can segue to Lisa, who's going to talk a little bit about how those formative assessments sort of are integrated into the way American Reading Company does its work and actually procures its materials. But actually, she's going to also talk about something that I think a term that we use a lot in education, which is validity, which is a really important term to use, especially when we're talking about formative assessment. And the last thing I'll say is the power of this conversation from a practitioner perspective, and I want our listeners to get this, is that we have practitioners doing the work on the ground. We have a researcher or a person who's given a research perspective coming from Lisa, who's a partner with American Reading Company. And then ultimately, we've got the American Reading Company and those materials that sit at the intersection of, shall we say, practice and research, making sure that we're using good materials to advance reading outcomes for kids. So that's what's going to go on in this conversation. You'll be hearing people from who are on the ground, but Lisa will chime in also from a research perspective. But let me let Lisa take it away here.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. The IRLA is a standards-aligned formative assessment based on a developmental reading taxonomy. Teachers use the IRLA on a regular basis throughout the year to measure students' reading proficiency. The IRLA provides specific, actionable data about where a student is along this continuum and the sequence of skills and behaviors needed next to accelerate reading growth. ARC's online performance management system, School Pace, provides teachers and administrators with the ability to track student performance and growth over time. Teachers use School Pace to gain insight into what each child knows and needs to learn next, as well as to effectively differentiate instruction, and accelerate growth for all learners. Next slide. With dashboards to track key metrics and drivers of success, School Pace empowers all stakeholders to identify where support and intervention are needed most. Next slide. Dashboards and reports show student performance in real time at the classroom, school, and district level, and allow educators to use data to equitably transform instruction and outcomes. A growing body of research, we have 29 studies and counting, shows the validity of the IRLA. Our research shows that IRLA measures what it is designed to measure, and that IRLA scores are a good indicator of how students will perform on other reading assessments, including end-of-year state tests. Back to you, Urban.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. That was an overview of the IRLA, and this particular resource is going to be talked a lot about as we go through this webinar. And so if you have questions that you have, make sure you put them in the chat, and we'll make sure we put them in front of individuals doing this work. So let me go right to our panel. Anthony, Chris, Matt, and have each one of you, to the extent possible, just set up your literacy. Before I go to the literacy strategy, I want to set up, if you will, your literacy challenges. Like, what were the challenges, the problems that you're like, you know what? Oh, we got to figure this out. That because some of the districts may be there. They're not quite at the early stage. They're at the stage of we got to do something. Chris, why don't you kick it off for us? Then we'll go to Anthony and then Matt.
Sure. So with the level of diversity that we have in our district, what we were finding was the assessment system that we were using previously wasn't meeting our needs. With the high level of multilingual learners that we serve in our district, what we found was the previous system was too black and white and didn't take into account the unique needs and really the moral, ethical, and professional responsibility that I feel we have to our multilingual learners to view all of our students through an asset base. And so we were looking for something that would do just that. We have high level assessments, and we wanted something that was closer to the classroom, closer to the teachers, and closer to the work that they do each and every day with students.
Wonderful. So you had a set of materials, you had some tools, but it wasn't speaking to the diversity, to the complexities of your population. And I love how you characterized it as not a fault on the part of students, but an asset that you had to figure out how to take advantage of. Really powerful. Anthony, then
Sure.
Matt.
So our dilemma was that we didn't have a system at all. We had adopted different programs about every 2 grade spans. So KN1 would have one reading program, 2 and 3 would have a different reading program, no universal assessment system. And what began to happen was students who struggled remained struggling and remained in the struggling classrooms, separated from their peers. So, many of my answers, I think, today will begin to highlight why we selected this assessment, this program, and what it's done for us. I mean, we were really 3 years ago in the realm of nothing. So.
Oh, that's really powerful. And I already love the differences between the two answers, right? Both were problems, but a very different problem, right? So yeah, there was something in Christine's school district, not much in Anthony, or it was a hodgepodge of things, which also happens in school districts. You do it at something at this grade and then something else at this grade, or even worse, something at this school and then something else at this school. And so there was a need to create some coherence, if you will, with Anthony's district. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, just to add pretty much build upon what Anthony's saying. So in Millville, coming in, we have 5 elementary schools, and pretty much the breakup is we have 20 sections running per grade level. And I can tell you that looks different at each school. So we had many people that are very skilled in teaching reading. But when you have a district like ours with high turnover, not everyone was being trained. So there was such a need. So there was a lot of lingering programs that were still there, some that were, from an assessment, we were just leaning on Dibbles. So Dibbles was that driving force. And when you come to Millville, the conversation is constantly around what is our tiered intervention. So everybody sees it as a tier 3. What we need more interventionists to deal with, 80 or 90% of our emergency students. When, now with IRLA coming in, we can address that as a tier 1. So that can happen within that classroom, even tier 2. So pretty much that was a hodgepodge of different things. And so more clarity, more fidelity, what we're dealing with now.
Thank you so much. And the other thing that Matthew brings up is professional development. And if I could just add a word, incoherence in professional development. Because if you have all of these different programs, then you got all kinds of training, not having shared language. You mentioned Dibbles also, which, boy, that I haven't heard that word very long time. But of course, that was the end all be all for many, many years in schools.
Right.
And then trying to figure out how you actually land on something. Oh, you mentioned tiered intervention, which is many of us know about MTSS, and everyone's asking questions about the tier 3 when we really should be having more conversations about tier 1, which is what Matt said. And I'm assuming, Matt, you're saying this allowed a tier 1 intervention perhaps before you got to the crisis.
Yeah, because in Millville, we don't have a tier 3 issue, and we don't solve this problem by continuing to add more interventionists. There's only so much we can do. So we're very hopeful with, going into year 3, we can address that throughout the classroom through the IRLA.
Wonderful. Well, you segue nicely into a conversation about the IRLA. And so if you don't mind kicking us off with this question around how you're beginning to think about the strategy for literacy and how does IRLA fit into that? Whoever wants to jump, you can start, Matt or Anthony, start.
I'll start.
Go ahead.
For us, our strategy was to build a responsive teaching and learning environment where our core teachers and our interventionists understood on a daily basis what students needed and respond to that appropriately. So in order to have that ability, we needed a common language of progress. And that is where IRLA met our needs. So IRLA, no matter what teaching strategies or what program we may be using in the classroom, IRLA is the language we use to talk about where students are, where they're going next, and what supports needed to be pulled in to get them to the next level. So it's not that we don't use other assessments. We use other assessments to confirm, get another perspective, but everything needs to come back to a common language, or else students are going to get a disjointed experience where all of the teachers don't know how to serve the need of the students. So that's how we have brought people together, by using IRLA as our language of progress.
Common language of progress. Use other assessments. This is for our audience. If there's this belief that, do I only use IRLA? No, there are other things. Obviously, you've got to use your state assessment and state assessment tools, formative assessment. But IRLA is the common language. How would you build on that, Matt, and then Chris?
Yeah. So like Anthony's saying, of course, we're trying to reach all students. So absolutely love the equitable conference schedule. So one of the things in Millville, we're ensuring that every student, every teacher is building that equitable conference schedule. It's posted, and we've worked with many of our coaches, and with that being posted in the classroom, the kids know if they're an emergency reader, that they're going to be seen by their classroom teacher at least 3 times, once every 3 days or so forth. So they get real excited to be able to pull to meet with that teacher. So I believe that we're meeting the needs from an equitable a lens. So it's not just I'll see all students, because not everyone needs exactly the same thing. So when we're looking in Millville, let's say we have 50% of our students identified as emergency. So how can we reach those students on a more frequent basis within those classrooms? The other thing I want to add with the IRLA that we really are driving from an administrative standpoint is we're able to look at what target skills, a majority of the skills that students need to focus on. So, we identify phonics as a big piece, and that can even be seen in 3rd and 4th grade here in Millville. So then we're having those conversations with teachers on how we can, put additional supports in to teach that for the students. So, I absolutely love how we can drill down into what specific skills students need.
Targeted skills, equitable conference schedule, which is a part of the whole ARC sort of IRLA system.
Right.
What would you add to that, Chris?
Well, I would echo a lot of the things that both Anthony and Matt are saying, but I would like to also add that one of the things that is really important to me and our district is that we want our teachers to develop close working relationships with their students, and we want our students to be the ones that are engaging in productive struggle. And the only way that we're really able to do that is by knowing our students' relationship with reading really intimately. And the IRLA allows us to do that. And so it's the tool that helps our teachers develop relationships with their students. It helps the students develop relationships with reading. And it helps teachers to know what that next best step is. Because quite frankly, I haven't met a single teacher that doesn't want to do every single thing that they can do for all of their students, let alone students who might be reading at the emergency text level. And so we want to make sure that they have the tools they need and feel confident in that what it is that they're going to be working on with that student is really what's the next best step for that particular student, and that they can hit it with a sense of urgency rather than panic, because that's not going to help anybody. So.
Absolutely. I want to elevate something that I think all 3 of you said in some way, and that is the role of the teacher, which we'll get to. We'll talk a little bit about how IRLA impacts the teacher role, teacher responsibility and whatnot. And you're already saying that. But you planted seeds for the student also, the role of the student. And so, Anthony, I think you talked about having things displayed, which students can then say, oh, this is where I am at, where I am. And then Christina and Matt, you talked about empowering teachers to have those conversations, equitable conferences. Maybe I just one more minute on how you see the IRLA changing the student teacher relationship, and then we'll talk more about the teacher specifically. Anyone want to jump in on that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
The reason why IRLA makes so much sense here, particularly, it builds students as assessment capable learners. They can see the next step. It's something, and I don't mean to dismiss other assessments. We use them, we do, but with IRLA, a student knows the specific skill that they need to achieve to keep moving to the next level. And with other assessment systems, sometimes that's a hidden secret, even to the teacher, until you do a running record and a student has made it to the next level. This makes it clear to everyone involved, that includes the student. They know when they're making progress because it's a concrete goal. And that's again, that common language is not just for teachers, it's for everyone involved in literacy.
That was so well said, Anthony. Sorry, Dr. Scott, I don't mean to be taking your.
Go right ahead.
But it's a place of empowerment for students, which, and builds a sense of self-efficacy when it's done well, and which is, reading isn't this passive act. And so we have to involve students in it from every step of the way. And IRLA does that.
Beautiful, beautiful. When I was a principal, this is sort of an aside, but still connected to this. When I was a principal, I used to, we would use things with the faculty, like Bloom's taxonomy. I would stress Bloom's with my teachers. I want to see you asking questions that are not just knowledge, but go up the taxonomy. But it always struck me that I don't think we ever spent time teaching students Bloom's taxonomy, right? And I actually think that could be worthwhile to do, to say to students, what we're trying to do is challenge you, and we use this framework called Bloom's taxonomy so that you are being challenged in a more aggressive way. And I feel like, so that's my story about Bloom's, but I feel like IRLA naturally provides that opportunity for students to become active participants. Students as assessment capable learners is the language that you're using, to be participants and empowered in their learning. That is powerful. And what I think is also powerful, and I turn it over to Matt real quick, is I just want to acknowledge something. What the individuals who are talking are superintendents and assistant superintendents. And I think this is a shout out to you guys. I think it's powerful to see assistant superintendents and superintendents so jazzed about a curricula and assessment. Although you've got a very high level of responsibility, you're really deep in the weeds around this. And I think that's really important for the superintendents and assistant superintendents who are out there. This is a good model. Matt, did you want to add anything to
Yeah,
that?
Dr. Scott, I'll add to that. So, we have curriculum committee meetings with the Board of Ed monthly, and this is my report out. So they want to see how students are moving from emergency and moving and on that continuum. And they want to see why, if students aren't. So when you're saying in the weeds, we are in it, but we have set such a high level now in Millville because they're looking at secondary, they're looking at every other content area saying, where's your assessments that match IRLA? And I just chuckle because I don't know any out there that can do this. But one more thing I'm just going to echo when you talk about, I always say it when you come from that perspective of when the IRLA is on a continuum. Kids can get behind it because it's not threatening, right? It's not where it's a deficit model where you're failing, you're not meeting the mark. We don't ever use that language. The students are constantly making progress. They know exact skills that they need to hone in to get to the next level to move forward. And there's a lot of coaching, a lot of celebrating in that. So I don't want to make this one, but like when you take the state exam and you don't meet the mark, you feel a little deflated, but I wish we could just stay because we made so much progress here in Millville and we celebrate those success using the IRLA. So,
That's beautiful.
That.
That is beautiful. We all remember, perhaps goes back to when we were kids, when there were ways that reading ability was distinguished and it was visible to students. Bluebirds is the way people normally refer to it, and how disheartening that would be. And so the point around this being a way to celebrate success, students knowing where they are and being motivated to move forward is really, really important. All right, let me jump to the next question. Formative assessment. Let's dive a little more deeply into formative assessments themselves. And if you just talk a little bit about how you're using formative assessment related to the IRLA to predict and actually then inform what you need to do, interventions for students. Who wants to kick us off on that? Chris, go ahead, jump in.
Sure. So we, as Anthony and Matt said, we are so involved with the data from a district level, from a school leadership level, from a PLC level and a teacher level. I think we would say that we eat, sleep, and breathe it in many respects. But what we're able to do with it is we're able to analyze the data on a really frequent basis. We do quadrant analysis so that we're looking to see which of our students are on progress to make at least a year's worth of growth, because that's what we expect for all of our students. But for the students who are striving, we're obviously looking for accelerated growth and for growth to outpace a year's worth of growth. And so using this has enabled us to do that on a very frequent basis. And we referenced it in sort of our previous conversation, but the beauty is that we don't have to wait for like a set period of time in which everybody and their brother and sister sit around the table and decide how you're going to flip the school schedule around every 6 weeks and move kids into a bunch of different interventions, right? And maybe think to yourself, well, I hope that Chris can fit in well with these 5 kids because we don't really have anywhere else to put her. What it does is it allows you to bring that differentiation and that targeted instruction into into your tier 1, your universal instruction. And then you can look at what targeted approach do we want to take with our students. And obviously, as you move into the most intensive level, so what are the student needs and what more do we have? What tools do we have at our disposal to help with the students that need that most supported level of instruction? And you can also really hone in how you're going to align all of that, because the last thing we want to do is fragment our students' day for our striving readers, the ones where this might not come as easily as it does for other students.
Very helpful. How would you add to that, Anthony, than Matt?
So, Chris said something that was so poignant, and I it's going to sound like I'm throwing a little shade, but there was a question in the chat about interim assessments and how can IRLA replace interim assessments. Let me tell you how and why it should in the vast majority of cases. Like, as Chris said, this is about getting kids what they need when they need it, not waiting for the world to stop every 9 weeks to benchmark. This is about, and we build a schedule in Elk Township that gives our interventionist a data analysis period every single day, so that a group needs to change tomorrow. They know when they go into 2nd grade, they're just pulling some different kids tomorrow than they did today or yesterday. It needs to be responsive, because if you're waiting 9 weeks to benchmark before you change your groups, you don't know if a student has had the aha moment or if they've hit the struggle, and you're waiting weeks to give them the help they need. So in terms of how we use the data, we use it quickly. It's not always perfect, of course it's not, but man alive, the difference you can make when you reach a reader when they start to struggle, as opposed to when they've been struggling for 8-9 weeks, it's light years worth of growth that you may have missed out on, or light years worth of this kid doesn't need to be with me for 9 weeks anymore. The magic happened. Let's get them back moving and accelerating and reading new books. That's how we use it, and it has been transformative for us.
Powerful. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many layers to how we're using the IRLA. I can speak from administrative, working with my supervisor weekly. We are running reports constantly from each school and looking even at classrooms, so we can address, if first going back, our students being conference, then our emergency students. So if we see that that's not happening, we push in our reading coach or the principal. There could be walkthroughs. And it's not about an I gotcha, right? It could just be like, I'm having trouble putting the data in. So then we can bring more supports to that. And we're using ARC coaches right now to address that, even with our new staff. We're also looking at maybe why students aren't making the growth in comparison. So if, I know Christine talked about, we're looking for 1 year of growth, but we have a small percentage that aren't making that, they might be at 0.2 or 3% growth. So then we want to understand that more. So we'll look and do like triangulation of data, look at their attendance. Are they here? So what are those barriers that are holding students back? But it's a push, and for administrators and teachers, it's like, it feels like there's an eye on them with all of this data. So we have to be very careful in how we use it, but they know we're looking at it, and one of the expectations we have is that principals are sending emails celebrating teachers that are hitting the mark. So we want to constantly build that piece, and those that need more assistance, we're giving that.
Beautiful. Matt just mentioned something that's so important for us to keep in mind in relationship to this as we think about data, formative assessment, is that people are tied to it. Not only students are tied to it, but teachers are tied to it. So you heard his sort of nod to being thoughtful about how that data is shared, celebrating where success is, but also just being strategic and thoughtful about how to share it in a way that doesn't seem to be putting, let's use the student language, a particular teacher on blast. But at the same time, it's important to share how kids are doing. And so I think that that's just a really important point. Lisa, I wanted you to chime in and build on anything that's been shared from what you see at ARC as these data come through.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. So, School Pace offers a lot of reporting, which all three of our panelists have talked about, looking at the district level, looking at the building level, looking at the classroom level. So it allows you to really dig deep and understand. Also, all three of these districts have decided to engage in a data sharing agreement with American Reading Company, which allows us to work very closely with them and help them to look at their data in different ways for the purposes that we've all talked about, right? Celebrating successes and also looking for areas where we need to focus to really help those students who are struggling the most.
Beautiful. And Lisa, if someone were to ask you from your perch, how can we be assured that these assessments, the data, that we can rely on them, that they're valid? How would you answer that question for those who are maybe in the audience?
Yeah, so when you think about validity, it's ongoing, and so we are constantly looking at the validity of our assessments. And so, just for example, a recent study that we did with Villa Park, so Chris's district, we found very strong correlations between scores on the IRLA and the Illinois state test. And so, Chris can be confident that she's looking at IRLA scores along the way. She can predict which of her kiddos are going to pass the state test based on how they're doing on IRLA, mid-year, going into the testing period.
Wonderful. I didn't mean to cut you off, if you wanted to add more to that. Do you have similar, because we have other states represented, you would have similar confidence with other states, so.
Yeah, sure. That's just one of many examples. As I mentioned earlier in the overview, we've conducted to date 29 studies,
Very nice.
and they are reported in our validity research brief. We are in the process of getting other districts on board to do this research. So as I said, it is ongoing. We did this type of research in New Jersey with both Anthony and Matthew's districts. And we did also see there that there were some moderate to strong correlations between IRLA scores and the New Jersey state assessment, as well as the interim assessments that they're using.
Wonderful. So if you have a question around, can I trust these assessments to be a reliable predictor of how students are going to ultimately do, which is what we know you're held accountable for. You're ultimately held accountable for how students are performing on these state assessments. Although I think one of you said that your school board is asking about how students are doing on the IRLA, or if I'm not mistaken, which I think is pretty powerful, that the board knows this tool enough to want to know how students are doing.
Yeah,
Was that you,
Dr.
Matt?
Yeah, Dr. Scott. So we're so far into how the board wants to see it is they want to identify not names of emergency readers, but they want to see their progress.
Mhm.
Like, okay, they're like from month to month when they know the moving target dates. So I mean, that's how we have the conversation. So, it's a common language here in
That's
Millville,
beautiful.
Erla.
That's beautiful.
It is.
Boards can focus on a lot of different things. This is one that I would be so happy that they would be focusing on if we had more boards doing that. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lisa. Let's jump into this question of teacher behavior. So if I'm a school district out there, someone in our audience who's wondering, okay, I wonder what this is going to look like for professional development for teachers, or how I engage teachers, or what teachers are going to eventually say. First of all, I should say to our panelists who are doing an amazing job, don't feel like you have to give a Pollyannish view. What are some of the wonderful things? What are some of the challenges as you were moving through this? Why don't you kick us off, Anthony, and then we'll go around.
Well, I'm glad you're letting us not be Pollyanna because I'm not going to be on this one. Um, so our teachers struggle with these BSI kids are my BSI kids. They will forever be my BSI kids. They're mine. I take care of them. There is this bias of kids never growing and always being defined by a single moment in time or a single span of time. So it has been really eye-opening. Again, it all goes back to the clarity of the IRLA. It all goes back to the fact that now there are logical progressive steps that even teachers really can't avoid, that is beginning to change some of those preconceived notions of students. And it also goes back to the last topic of validity, that great, there are a lot of studies that are showing the validity. To translate the validity to teachers, we talk about things like, hey, don't get a kid to a level, get them through a level. And when they get through a level, if that happens to be the grade level expectation, through the level has a greater amount of validity with the state assessment than to the level. And it's just putting things in concrete terms to break down the barriers of what kids can actually achieve. Again, we are 2 years into this. I have some tough conversations. We just have IRLA'd our students. So we're having those conversations that no, these kids are actually exactly where we want them to be. They don't need to be with you in BSI anymore, but no, they're mine. They're not yours. We don't possess children. So we're having those conversations. It's tough. It's tough. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Chris, how would you add to that?
So I will not be Pollyanna-ish either, because anything worth doing is going to be hard. So I mean, I think have to embrace that. So what I really love about the IRLA is its clarity, as well as that balance and that tension between teacher expertise, right? So it's not so black and white. That's why it's so good for our multilingual learners. So it's a heavy lift, like it requires people to learn a lot. And that's hard, right? That's really hard. It's worth doing, and our teachers are doing it, but it is really hard and it feels very overwhelming. And as a sort of reaction to that, because teachers tend to be people who are attracted to the teaching profession, I have found, tend to be perfectionistic, always wanting to do things exactly right. There's also this fear that maybe we're not giving the IRLA in the same way. But what's great is that there are systems that you learn with quick levels checks, and then you develop a system within your building to make sure that you have inter-rater reliability, which then leads to these correlational studies, data studies, that show you that ultimately the IRLA can be this sort of leading indicator of how you're going to do on your state assessments, which is fantastic. The other thing that I would say is hard about this, and then I promise I'll be quiet so Matt can jump in, is that it does push up against teachers maybe facing the fact that best practice has changed, and that, you know, the field of reading is developing so quickly in so many ways with the focus on the science of reading, that sometimes some of the things that we've been doing, which we thought were best practice, weren't in fact. And so it does force us to confront some things and have some difficult conversations. But it's all in the service of doing what's right for kids. And so everybody, I think, approaches the table with a learning lens.
It's a stretch. It's a stretch for a lot of people, is what I'm hearing, for different reasons. My kids, which is Anthony's talking about, and hard to give up. And Christine is sort of alluding to my way of doing things, which may have been the way they did it and thought they had success when the practice is actually evolving. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so I'm going to go from a different approach on that. So when the IRLA is right, it's so different. I've never done it this way. I take anecdotal notes, and now you're making me put all this information on a computer. Well, I'm going to continue with my anecdotal notes, but we know as a teacher, things are moving so fast, and then we're behind on that. So I'm going to give credit to ARC because of the amount of professional development that is offered and the support. So one of the arguments in Millville was, we are getting too much professional development. I'm pulled out of my room too much. And I just smile to that if that's our biggest issue in this. So, you know, it is new. It's a new style of how we're inputting all the data. But I just love the amount of support we had in the first 2 years. And now we have a different model of what we're doing. We're more focused on our new teachers or any identified teachers that need more assistance in that. So
Wonderful. Professional development. Why don't we dive just a little more there, and talk particularly about in any component of professional development that you want to just lift up. There's the coaching, there are other parts of the professional development. Matt, you talked about people feeling like it's quite a bit. Maybe you can either of you can talk about how this system is different from previous systems when it comes to professional development.
Sure. So first, I know that our coach is on this call, so shout out to Kelly Borden. We love you. So that's side-by-side coaching, and we were able to tailor it based on what we felt the teachers needed, say, that month. So, hey, the teachers really need for you to go in and go side by side with them for lessons. Or, hey, the teachers really need to sit down with you during their prep and go over the data. It was very customizable, but I know what I benefited from was the leadership learning series, where I attended monthly meetings. I was not a literacy teacher, but the degree to which I felt I was prepared to adopt and implement this program because of the leadership supports that I was given. Hey, Anthony, pull some writing samples. I want you to go over them with us as a core group of leaders once a month. That was really powerful for me because I was never exposed to that in my teaching career.
let me add to that, Anthony. So I want to stay with that leadership series. So in Millville, we had 10 leadership series that each year. And I'm going to give one example of how that was exemplified this summer. So we have a vice principal who runs our summer program, 180 students, and we use ARC during our summer. And I'm receiving emails that he's doing his walkthroughs, and he's now having dialogue with teachers about their power goals. So he wants to have dialogue. Like, I see the power goal you chose, but I'm looking at their level. Is this really what you should do? And I'm like, this is what's working, right? This is exactly what we need, because if ARC is doing it right, they're getting themselves out of a job, right? They're working themselves right out of a job because they're training our leaders. We need principal leadership, right, to take this and move this forward. And we're seeing that. So I just, that's the big piece that I absolutely love.
Beautiful. Go ahead, Chris.
So I could spend a long time talking about the benefit and the power of the leadership learning series and art coaching that you can get at the building level. But a point that I really want to highlight, and I think it's really critical, is that the IRLA itself provides professional development to teachers as they give it, as they learn more about it, as they learn about the reading taxonomy, and as they work in their professional learning communities, as they're doing their quick levels checks and they're developing that inter-rater reliability, that's professional development in and of itself, and it's extremely powerful. So for instance, I just am thinking back to like some of our K and first grade teachers learning about like analytic versus synthetic phonics as a result of using the IRLA. Like, how powerful is that? That the ability to learn more about phonemic awareness and phonics was able to be done at a deep level through using the IRLA. So I just wanted to highlight that because that's been really powerful for our district.
That's amazing. I'm not surprised this is going on with leaders in your district because you guys are modeling that. I just want to call that out. It's hard not to do it at a principal level if your superintendent is all over it or your assistant superintendent is all over it. So shout out to you. But more importantly, to your point, is there are tools that are offered through the resource that enables that professional development, that leadership learning. Megan, any thoughts, reactions, questions from the audience you want to jump in on before we close out?
And I do want to uptick because Chris just totally answered the question about where the phonics and phonological awareness is. So within the IRLA, there's also screeners within the assessment to actually identify what the student can do well and what they need to do next. So as we think about the IRLA as a K-12 formative assessment, it also has that reading on-ramp to really be able to provide where the student is and where they're ready to go. The other thing I just want to highlight as like assistant superintendents and superintendents talking about going in and being able to administer the formative assessment. And I think how powerful that is. I was in a district last week walking around with the superintendent, and he wasn't just popping in classrooms. He was going into classrooms and saying, what is your power goal? What are you working on? And being able to have that at the highest level of leadership is truly going to be able to provide a formative assessment for your schools. So the IRLA is providing it for your students. The way in which you're able to go into classrooms and to see where students and teachers are, that's a formative assessment in itself.
That's powerful. I agree 100%. And that's leadership. And what I also hear is that these tools enable more leadership, and not just inspiring leadership, but structural, tactical leadership. And so great job. We're coming to a close. Matt, Anthony, Chris, this has been amazing. What would any parting words for individuals who are out there who might be wondering what direction to go in, or what would you say as we close out this conversation about the work that you're doing and about how these tools enable it? And why don't you start for us, Matt?
So I think we hit pretty well about the IRLA. So I want to talk more about it's having all stakeholders having the buy-in when you bring in a program like this. It is so different and so fast. If it doesn't have the support of those stakeholders, of the superintendent, and that district admin and the principals, it could go south in a hurry. right? Because it's a lot of work. So you have to buy in, and we do a lot of celebrations. We did that in year one. I can tell you last night we already had our reading night, and it's all, IRLA. We meeting with families, talking to them about how they can support the reading at home. What does it look like when books are coming home? So we are vested in that. We are constantly having those conversations. You heard me talk about the board. So you have to do everything in your power to get all stakeholders involved in this, because it is a lot of work, but it does pay dividends. And what's that dividend, right? It's about kids loving to read. Our ELA supervisor presented our standardized test scores to the board, and she said, I can show you the data from the state, but I'm going to tell you about how much kids love to read right now. And they're excited about that. So that's the language we're constantly using.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Anthony?
Sure. So I'm very proud to say that in short order, we've experienced a reading revolution in our district. Our kids love to read. If you looked at our cohort growth on state assessments, we have some grade levels that prior to ARC, let's say I was in third grade and we were at 25% proficient. 1 year after ARC, those fourth graders almost doubled in proficiency. And then they went even further. There's real acceleration happening. And it's seen not just in IRLA, but in those outside measures. And just like Matt said, my board loves this. I gave my presentation of standardized assessment results probably a week or two ago, and I put them side by side with the IRLA. And they remarked, we've never had anything like this. We've never had information like this. Kids are taking books home and reading. And as many of you probably know, sometimes board meetings are contentious and for all the wrong reasons. We have been able to steer clear of all of those controversies because we're talking about a love of learning and progress. And that's infectious, just like some of the negative things are infectious. You have to choose which direction you're going to go in. And this has been a blessing for us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anthony. Chris?
I mean, I think I would just echo a lot of the things that both Matt and Anthony have said. I mean, we use the IRLA for our district improvement process. Our schools use it for school improvement. Our PLCs use it, and our teachers are using it. I would also just say that I just met with Lisa, and the students who we found at their baseline levels were reading text at the emergency level has decreased from 48% in the first year that we used IRLA to 21% last year. So yeah, so like it's doing what we want for kids. And I think that the other thing that I can't stress enough is that ARC as a company wants students to love reading. It's a culture of reading. And the reality is that we can test kids all we want, and we can try to teach them all we want, but if they don't love to read, we're in an uphill battle. It's an uphill battle. And so it's just from that to the asset-based. And I just want to say this too, we didn't even talk about ENIL. So for those of you who are, one-way dual or two-way dual or TBE, transitional bilingual education, you have ENIL at your fingertips as well, with the ability to compare, Spanish language with English language. There's just so much that we could say about this and the power of the IRLA. So
beautiful, absolutely amazing. And it goes back to Christine sort of took us back into the way we began with the Frederick Douglass quote, once you learn to read, you will be free forever. And that is what it's ultimately about. It's not just about test scores. It's about giving students the power as readers to navigate the world is what it's ultimately about in a free way. This has been absolutely amazing. We're at 4:30 on the dot. Let me turn it over to Megan and her team to take us out. Wonderful job, Anthony. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to the chat. Thank you for the questions and thank you for participating. Please don't miss our next Voices from the Field, which will be in November, and it will be the Tales of Curriculum Adoption. We will be talking to some of our partners around their journey of adopting a high quality curriculum, and that will be in November.